Welcome, everybody. I'm Kathy Fayok, the business book strategist, and I want to welcome you to this webinar featuring one of the authors of Compassionate Work. We have Carol I'm sorry,
Stizza, you're doing good.
Stizza.
Stizza,
I always want to put a little z in it.
if,
Stizza.
if you were in Italy, it would be Stizza.
I know
Stizza.
that's see my Italian tells me that that's where I want to go with it. But Carol Stizza is one of the authors, and just so delighted that she's going to talk with us today about her chapter. And I'm curious to know what she's going to be saying to you about compassionate curiosity. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Carol, to guide us on a journey of learning more about compassionate curiosity.
Great. Well, thank you. So I'm really privileged to be able to kind of highlight a chapter in this book. It's a wonderful compilation and an anthology from a lot of different perspectives in HR and organizational development. And I chose to kind of step into using compassionate curiosity, and I called it the 5-pound workout with 100-pound results because this time of year, actually, we understand the beauty of working out and how hard it is to start sometimes if we don't know the results we're going to get. So compassionate curiosity, and I'll kind of move to the next slide here. Come on, computer, you can do this. There we go. So we're going to take a peek into sharing some of the tips here. So jump into the chat room and ask any questions you have. But I do want to welcome the conversation because I'm going to tap into some areas that will probably drive some stories of your own, and we can include them along the way. So curiosity, by definition, is the desire to know more. And I found a book last year called Curiosity by Dr. Todd Kashdan, and he is a clinical psychologist who was really trying to understand if the theory of positive psychology would aid him in diagnosing and helping clients he had that were considering suicide, were suffering depression or anxiety. And what he found was that happiness is not something you have. It's not something you go get. It's a different way of thinking. But to get people to thinking that way, there was a disconnect, and he discovered that the actual use of curiosity shifts the brain away from self-reflection into outer reflection. And this is a concept used a lot of times in coaching, business coaching, executive coaching, any type of coaching, but it's not something we go, okay, now let's employ curiosity. It's a state of being as a coach to meet someone where they're at. And as I started to use a coach approach, I've always used a coach approach in working and training with teams, but then working with individuals, trying to get them to shift to open to new perspectives, I implement curiosity and ask questions stemming from that. And then I started to realize, this actually could be a useful tool for people to use in the office. And when we use this tool, people reported feeling as if I had become more empathetic with them. I was more compassionate where they were opening up and able to look at themselves with more empathy. So you will actually get to understand what curiosity can do for you and for others, as well as the ability to use curiosity to really diffuse several types of actions and emotions that actually compromise the workplace. It allows you to step into conversations and gain richer information than you would have known to form as a question yourself, or they would have known to offer. And by using curiosity myself, I found that this actually was the fastest tool at my disposal than any other soft skill I have. And I've been complimented for having a wide variety of people skills as I've moved through HR positions and adapted as a military spouse, moving and reinventing myself at every location. So this was really something I tapped into. And so when the opportunity came to write in this book, that's where I stepped in, is with compassionate curiosity. So curiosity, the desire to know more, has been to psychologically have a lot of power. It literally takes us out of ourselves and reminds us that we're a part of a diverse universe. full of other people with different perspectives, that it reminds us that people don't all think the same. And we have a tendency to go through our day communicating in the way we would take in, sometimes and many times forgetting how other people take it in. More specifically, empathic curiosity is the desire to know more about other people. And so by wanting to put compassion into the workplace or compassion into the relationships you have with others in anywhere, you need to be able to tap into using curiosity as the need or desire to know more about other people. One of the interesting things that I found along the way when I started purposely using curiosity to achieve compassion, it also drove more accountability and buy-in in solutions we were discussing together in conversations. Using curiosity allows you to ask questions from a genuinely open-minded perspective or stance. Even saying, "I'm curious," you will actually subconsciously shift the way you think about the conversation you're stepping into. And it is just one of these scientific wonders. And the book that I referenced in the beginning, called Curiosity by this psychologist, he did like 10 years of research on this. And we as humans are always seeking out the novel and the unknown, which explains a lot why we will move our schedules to take part in watching something new to us like Game of Thrones and then rush back to the office and talk about it. The reason we're continually seeking out the novel and unknown in that manner is that there's no negative feedback. We watch a show, we give our opinion, we talk about it, we watch another show. The reason people are scared to step into new and novel conversations is that fear of feedback, positive or negative. It's the unknown feedback. When we actually approach a conversation using curiosity, we're not approaching it as if there's going to be feedback. We're curious about someone else's way of thinking. And I kind of put some samples of questions. When I'm curious, I want to know what your thoughts are on how to approach this. I'm just putting it out there. Where would you start on this? What ideas do you have on this? Who am I forgetting to involve? And by just asking these questions from that perspective and allowing the other person to be asked, one conveys that you value them, which is a huge step towards having a more compassionate environment. Let's say they are so surprised that you're taking this time to ask them that they kind of freeze. Recognize that and say, you know what, I get it. I'm asking you kind of something open-ended. Take some time. I'm interested in your perspective. Just let me know when you have one, and walk off. The fact that you've asked them allows them to feel valued. But let's say you're in a meeting and they do have ideas and they step in and offer. The fact that you're offering to hear them, again, relays the value and allows you to gain information and empathize more with where this person is coming from. And if you still aren't clear where they're coming from, ask those questions. I'm curious, where did this idea stem from? Or I'm curious, how did you come to this perspective? And just asking things from that perspective allows them to open up for you and allows you both to step into a conversation feeling as teammates and understanding where to go next. You will actually learn more about how someone thinks, how they interpret information, motivates their ideas, what even motivates their actions, who they feel is affected by decisions being made, and how they view their own responsibility. When I've worked with people who come to me as when I was in an HR role, that tap on the door, hey, you got a minute? And you're like, this is not going to be a minute. Oh boy. A lot of times I found that by just being curious and say, okay, I get that you're feeling whatever, or that you're confused. Tell me more. I'm curious where this came from. When did this start? Whose perspective is this from? Is it just from your perspective, or has this been influenced by others? And I would really just kind of sit back and ask a question. What's your part in this? What can you control? But the biggest question I found is, I'm curious, what do you see? What do you want to see happen next? Sometimes they just want to vent, but it's a clarifying moment where you get that answer. I just needed to vent to you. Okay, great. You know, they're giving me history, they're giving me background. I've tucked it away. I'm not going to file any paperwork. They just needed to vent. Somebody was there. Sometimes HR gets that reputation as a place that you should go to vent, and I'm okay with that. But I actually sit there and implement curiosity so that it frees me from needing to be judgmental. And the reason I use that term is that part of this research that I read about understanding more about curiosity, which really made sense and it hit home. And we've seen a lot from Brene Brown this year on her studies of shame, is when we categorize people, when we label people, we do that to allow ourselves to kind of relax and feel like we know people. But really, the moment we do that, we are denying them of 50% of their humanity in our eyes. We have put them in a category. I'm going to leave them there. I'm going to only deal with things I don't know that exists other than that category. And it robs you of being more compassionate to people as people in their 100% humanity zone. And that's kind of this big, fluffy, couple of sentences here. But the takeaway is don't label and categorize people. Really refrain yourself from doing that, because it leaves you open to seeing them as 100% human in all their frailties. You don't know what challenges they're dealing with. You don't know what baggage they're dealing with. You don't know what stresses came along with them arriving at work. And if you can refrain from labeling or categorizing them, it will help you out immensely in being more curious and understanding where they come from when they present a problem, or helping find the solutions together. So when I specifically talk in the book about what curiosity or compassionate curiosity can do for you, the end user, especially in the workplace, and it's these 7 items, and I'll just pick 3, but I'm of the mindset that when there's a big problem, I need to know what I can do to make a difference. What can I do? One little person, one little day at a time, what can I do? And I kind of come at everything that way. So I kind of nail it down, I drive it down to actionable things that I can actually influence. When I started to use curiosity, not only in training or coaching or problem solving, I found that I could quickly diffuse drama. I could quickly minimize gossip. I couldn't stop it. It is a human way for people to connect when they don't know any other way to connect. But it did minimize it. I knew that kindly they knew it stopped with me. I could lessen stress by understanding a little bit more about them. It automatically increased accountability and drove innovation, but it was my way of driving company compassion overall and nurturing richer conversations. So that was really a nice thing to kind of realize after applying this compassionate curiosity in my own work. So I picked 3. I picked diffusing drama because I can harness and talk about minimizing gossip in the same way. And I talked about increasing accountability. I will talk about that and how it lessens stress. Just using compassionate curiosity as a focus will really kind of drive this down. So diffusing drama, this is one of the topics that HR professionals talk about probably more than we just talk about anything else, because of the decisions being made and what they cause, what happens at work on limited information or lots of assumptions. And they'll walk around, they'll come out of a meeting, they'll walk into a meeting, they'll walk into my office, and they're one of many emotions. And I have found one of the best things to understand point blank and to sometimes state with clarity: emotions aren't right or wrong. They are what they are. You are feeling them, that makes them real, that is your current truth. I need to meet you where you are. So help me understand what you're feeling. I'm very curious to know exactly what you're feeling. I don't need to know why yet. Walk me through what you're feeling. So if somebody comes and they're angry, they immediately want to tell you why and whose fault it is. And no, I'm not there yet. Tell me how angry you are. What are you feeling? What's this anger do to you? And the moment they have to start explaining it, it diffuses that emotion. The moment we label something that's new and novel, it deflates it. So this has been a great conflict negotiation skill I've developed as I've worked with people. And I came from a very conflict heavy family life, and that probably aided my understanding what tools to use pretty quick. If somebody's feeling sad and crying, I will wait for them. And I said, walk me through what's made you this sad feeling. You know, I'm just feeling despair. Are you feeling just marginalized? Are your feelings hurt? What is this sadness about? Frustration, same thing, all of this. So as they start to share, I do thank them for sharing. They've honored me with this. They've answered my question. And sometimes they're just like, that's all I needed. Thanks for listening. And I said, well, wait a minute. You know, we might be able to come to some type of solution so this doesn't happen again. I'm curious about what happened to make you feel this way. Can you walk me through the details? I know this is from your perspective and your perspective only, but walk me through the details that you saw. And let them do that. Let them walk you through it. You're getting to see one situation from their perspective. Will you take the time to find out the rest? It depends on the topic, right? They just got their feelings hurt. There may be nothing you can do, but your job is driving compassion in your office, in your environment. This is one way to do it. And after they've shared, you reiterate, yes, this is one perspective, but I'm curious what you'd like to see happen next. Sometimes they don't need anything to happen next. Just the fact that they got listened to and validated and reminded that they are valued is all it takes. But a lot of times they'll say, here's what I really feel should happen. And you have to then step into a conversation. Well, let's talk through that. How would we make that happen? How would you, in your eyes, I'm curious how you would see that evolving and happening. And sometimes you're going to be very surprised that they actually do have a great solution that doesn't take anybody out with them, right? Here's the solution I'm offering. It could be timing of the meetings or time management of the meetings, or I have been wowed more times than I've been disappointed when I've asked them to create a solution with me. What is your perspective of what the solution would look like? And that has been one of the best highlights of using curiosity to diffuse drama. So at this point, does anybody have a question about using curiosity in this way? I find that some people get stuck here or they don't know how to implement it. Does anybody have any questions? If you do, just holler, raise your hand. I'm sure Kathy will jump in.
Yes, absolutely. Use the chat function and type in your ideas. But no, I think, Carol, this is really, really great stuff. So I'm reminded of one of my consulting buddies, and she always used the expression, help me understand, when she was working with a problem client. And
Right.
I thought that was brilliant, because help me understand is one of those great phrases that can pull you through a lot of difficult situations.
You know, I'm glad you brought that up, because my husband's an executive, and, you know, he calls me his free HR consultant on the side. And we'll be walking the dogs. We walk them every morning, even in weather like this. It's very cold. But I asked him, you know, do you ever use the phrase, what phrases do you use to step into these conversations? And he says, I've heard you talk, and I now use, I'm curious, because I didn't want to use, I'm the boss, help me understand. Because in his frame of thinking, from a guy's perspective, help me was not an attractive phrase for him. And I thought that was very interesting to hear, because sometimes we do have to hear from different people's perspectives of what they're comfortable using. So I was really, happy to hear that he was using something. I'm curious, allows me to suddenly put us both at a level playing field, and it lifts my person's confidence up to talk to me. And I found that it works better than approaching it any other way. And I was just really happy to hear that he listened to me. But at the same time, it was interesting to hear that as women who are nurturers, help me understand, we feel is a level playing field, but men don't. And I thought that was really, really enlightening for me.
Yeah, very good. Very good. Well, I'm not seeing any other questions, so I would say carry on, Carol.
So I'll go on to increases accountability, because this is the number one complaint I get from leaders. How do I make them own their own crap, right? I mean, they just have little placards that send "own your S," and you're like, okay. Um, Taking ownership is key, but sometimes they don't know that they've been given permission. I work with millennial leaders that are moving up, and we have stuck people in very feedback-rich educational systems. The SOL tests, the grades, the comments, the semesters. I mean, they know when something starts and ends in grading, and we throw them into the world, and they want to be a leader. They might have been a leader in sports, but they still were in a great parameter of feedback. And so it's almost as if someone has to give them permission to step into their own. And so I found that was a difficult conversation for them. Or like, well, how do I know I'm supposed to be taking responsibility? How do I know when? And I'm like, the moment you left school, sadly enough, and nobody said, with this diploma, own your stuff, right? Own your crap. So I have found that this compassionate curiosity perspective, this approach to questioning, has really allowed me to step into conversations faster with millennials than any other format I've tried before. And I will actually sit down and say, what do you think the expectations are around your work for this project to make it the most successful? Where are you? What do you think is being asked of you? And they will step into it. It's very timid sometimes at first. And I said, well, and I have to walk them through, sit on the other side of the desk. If you've been given this, what does this look like to you? I'm curious, what is an example of what that looks like from your perspective? Like, what does a great letter look like to you? And this is where I found the biggest gaps of communication between trainers and trainees, between bosses and managers and their new employees in the onboarding system. This is where I have found the gaps the fastest, is when I ask the people who are supposed to be doing the work, what does a great piece of work look like from your perspective? And so if they're on target, great. If they're not on target, okay. And I never call them out. I'm really glad that you shared that with me, because I've seen different levels of success in this area. I'm glad to know yours. If I were to tell you this isn't as successful as it could be, I'm curious, what do you feel you need to do more of to be successful here? And they may go, oh, you mean this isn't the top of the line successful look of a letter? I'm using an arbitrary example that's simple. Then I guess I would go to my manager and say, can you give me an example of what it should look like? And I said, that's interesting, because I would have assumed that example was provided for you, but now I'm seeing a gap that we can improve on. So I'm curious, if we were to go backwards to your onboarding, now what support do you need to be your best? And this way they're stepping into the solution conversation. And when they step into the solution conversation, they now are actually stepping into ownership and buy-in, so that whatever decision is made about change, they'll go, okay, I've added my piece. I can now say, I offered this, why was that chosen? And we can explain it, right? So now everybody's in the mix of the solution. And we can ask these questions in a variety of ways. But again, when you step into it from a place of, I'm curious, there's no accusation, there's no defensiveness. You do have to watch your tone. I don't want you to say, I'm curious. No, you have to really say, genuinely, I'm curious. What do you see? What's your perspective here? What do you want to see happen? How would you approach this differently? What do you need next? And that I'm curious perspective is this amazing mental shift. So the next one, I'm showing a different slide, compassionate curiosity, lessens stress. And I shared this story in my chapter of the book. It was about a friend of mine who revealed to me the quality of one of her best bosses. And she says, my best boss, here's what he did. My first month at work, she had come out of a divorce. It was not a comfortable situation for her. She had worked from home. She had children. Now she had to work out of the home because of the compensation she needed. And she got a call, her very first call in the office, that her kid was sick at school and needed to be taken home. The ex was not participating. And she was very fearful of what that would reflect on her at work. She did not know that her boss had spent quite a bit of his career time as a single parent. She had no idea. And so when she went to him and said, I've just gotten a call from the school, my child's sick and needs to be picked up, I'm not sure how to handle this my first month in the office. I don't want you to think less of me. I want to do my work. Would you like me to come back after I find a sitter? What would you like to see me do here? And he looked at her and he goes, you need to go home. Your child is number one. And if you aren't able to take care of your kids, then I don't get the best of you at work. And that just relieved her so much. And she came back to him and said, I'm really curious. And this was just not like I'm coaching her. It was just, I'm curious. Yesterday, you responded in a way I hadn't expected. Thank you. And that's when he shared with her that he also had been a single parent for a while and knew how hard it was. Now, not every example is going to come with somebody automatically empathizing with your situation. But by going around your office and having conversations and richer conversations, I see you've got pictures on your desk about children. Are those your children? Are they nieces and nephews? Or I'm curious, when we change the schedule here at work, what effect does that have on you outside of work? I'm curious if I needed to pull you in on a Saturday, what does that do to your social life, your outside life? And just asking out of curiosity, you're not being nosy, you're picking on them. You may ask somebody, I'm curious, I've seen so-and-so look stressed at work. Is there something we can do to lessen that? I mean, all you're doing is using curiosity to go around and get to know people from a very unique standpoint. So there are quite a few questions that I've used. I actually was in an office once where the manager was she would actually tell people, I'm the HR manager, but I hate people. And you're like, great, I won't come to you. And she would sometimes show a lot of compassion, empathy, but she would not show it in others. And one of the ways that struck me was we had a very multi-ethnic office. It was a wonderful office, but we had people of different religions, which then were linked to different dietary needs. We had, Orthodox Jews, we had Greeks, we had Muslims, we had Catholics, people who were not Catholic, Easter, got all these different areas that affected diet. And we would do a monthly luncheon. And sometimes she would actually send around and say, we're going to this restaurant, here's the menu, pick something that works, a multi-diet friendly restaurant. And other times she just didn't care. And so it became a very insecure dietary adventure into our monthly luncheons. And I was like, how easy would it have been just to make sure you knew enough about people to know what would work and what wouldn't? And she wouldn't take that time. I mean, I came in and I did that and I said, can I take over the luncheons? That's my baby. Let me do that. So that I was able to step in and say, okay, gluten-free pizza dough here, meatless pizza, dairy, vegans, vegetarian, whatever, and at least find a way to make everyone feel valued for just that small thing that affected them so deeply. How easy is it? So it's just driving compassion in the environment through the small ways affect people. Whether they have kids or not, need to be let go for sports, adapting those ways. That drives your company to be more compassionate in those unique ways. So when I share all this, people go, it's overwhelming. Just getting curious about people can feel like you have to get curious about people all at once. And I'm not saying do that. I can guarantee that you'll learn new things about people you never imagined. But just start with one conversation. And I'll give an example. I have a godmother I've known my entire life. And I've always known she loves the color lavender. It's not just purple, but lavender. And I was on the call with her one day and I said, I'm curious. I don't see you wearing lavender, but you really love lavender blankets, lavender quilts, lavender flowers. And I said, I'd love to know more about where you came into your love of lavender. And I'm thinking it's because someone says, oh, it looks good on you. She just You can't buy lavender a lot at this point in time. Different colors were in trend. And I was able to have her, she stopped and she goes, huh. And it took her back to a point in time in her childhood. She teared up actually. And I'm like, oh, I opened a can of worms. Oh my goodness. But it turned out to be just a lovely story about her mom and grandmother and gardening and quilting and just this color allowed her to feel connected to these memories in such a unique way that now I understood more about what lavender meant to her. So I could then give a gift that might be lavender in color, not just in everything, but on certain things. Because when you tell people your favorite color and suddenly you're barraged with this favorite color, it's maybe not your favorite color anymore. So it was good to understand why that was, so that my gifts of that color were more meaningful from then on. And I found that that's been helpful in getting to know people when people say this, what is your favorite food? What's your favorite snack? I then go, well, tell me the first time you realized that. Or I see you wear red a lot. Is that your favorite color? No, I just look good in it. When was the first time someone told you that you look good in it? So it's just taking curiosity past the just kind of what we call small talk conversation, but still not diving too personally. You're just asking a question out of curiosity. So when I say start with one conversation, just start there. It could be with a family member, practice at home, practice with your friends. It's a muscle you build, this curiosity muscle. And I've learned that as I build it and it becomes stronger, people go, I love talking to you. You seem to be a great listener. I mean, I never got those compliments before when I was younger because I was raising small children and it was desperate for adult conversation. And we all have seen the people, they come at you just needing to talk at you. And you're like, oh, yes, we all spend time there in that category at some point in our life, unfortunately. But coming out of it and using this has been a faster transition to having richer conversations with people, getting to know people at work faster, making them feel valued faster. And all of that lends its way to developing a very compassionate environment at work so that the big decisions you make, you know exactly who's going to suffer. I mean, the definition of compassion is to be able to step in and understand people's suffering. And it sounds like counterintuitive. Why would I want to know that? Why would I want to include suffering at work? Every decision we make at work that involves money or time will make someone suffer somehow. And so to understand how it affects them will lessen the suffering, because now we know how to couch that decision, ease that decision in, explain that decision, get buy-in for that decision. So driving compassion at work should be a no-brainer, but it's a fluffy term and a feely fluffy term that people like compassion at work. I don't buy into it. I'm like, okay, I get that. But knowing your people enough to know the fallout from your decisions automatically drives better compassion. So on that note, what are you curious about when we talk about this type of stepping into using curiosity as a personal tool? And if anybody has any questions, just, throw them my way.
Okay, so I am curious. I think this is a great construct, and I'm curious as to how you introduce this into organizations. Is this a training that you do? Is this coaching that you do for the leader? How do you implement a culture of compassionate curiosity?
And that's a great question, because when I start trainings, coaching, and you kind of do your introduction, we're here because of this, or here's what we're doing. My next question is, now that you know you're here and why you're here, what are you curious about? So I have to use it first for them to then be open to me telling them to use it later. I have to walk the walk and show them how it's done. So that when I say, I need you to go out and talk with your team and see what they're curious about, all they've done is watch me do that in action. And so when they come back and I said, what did you learn by being curious? And they haven't been curious. That's when I get to go, so tell me more. What was hard about you being curious? And a lot of times it's just a mind shift. They didn't see the value in it, and I can talk about that. But I have to I implement this as one of my ways of getting people on board and working and part of the conversation and letting them see it in action before I can ask them. And when I ask them and they go, I don't get what you mean. I said, what did I do at the beginning of our time together? I asked what you're curious about. What did that do for you?
Mm-hmm.
You allowed you to step in the conversation. How'd you feel about that? Now I'm asking you to offer that to the people you need information from. And they're like, oh, okay, now I get it, right? So it is a mental shift, but I have to use it first. So does that answer your question?
Yes,
Okay.
it begins to. So again, do you offer this as a training? Is this something that you do for organizations, or do you do it more with individuals? Talk to me about how you go about introducing this to an organization.
So I actually haven't introduced just using curiosity as a standalone concept, but it gets used immediately when I'm working with a team. So, for example, I was called in to work with a team of millennial managers. They were rock stars trying to move up, and they were literally getting denied promotions in this promotion interview process. And their manager contacted me, can you develop a training to help them understand what they're missing so that they can move up? And I said, well, we'll find out, right? And so we sat down, and I understood quickly that they didn't know how to communicate their value by sharing examples of how they solve everyday problems. It was so natural to them, they didn't know that was what was being needed to communicate. And so when we started, I said, what do you think the person who's interviewing is curious about? And I use it often, so it's kind of a mainstay. So I love how you're asking, have I just sat down and used curiosity or compassionate curiosity as its standalone construct? And I haven't. And I don't know if I should or not. So that's kind of a nice kind of a segue to but I've used it in everything I've done, whether it's how to ask and receive feedback. What are you curious about? Using curiosity as a way to do that when you're interviewing and you're developing, preparing for promotion or an interview. What do you think they're curious about? What are you going to share with them? That might be a great segue to introducing compassionate curiosity as a standalone. Great question.
Yeah, okay. Randy has a comment here. She says, I like that you use the word or the phrase, I am curious. And she sees that it really can put people at ease. In the past, she dealt with a male manager that thought was so strong. But if I asked, how can you help me understand this? But your phrase is much better to make people comfortable than the help me understand. Because, yeah, I can see that help me understand this can be maybe confrontational.
It can be. And I think because we've used it in trying to solve arguments so often, help me understand is like prove to me your stance almost. And it's not that it started out that way. I think it's just gained that little nuance reputation. And literally when I read up on curiosity, here's a funny fact. We as this current generation have used the word curious less than any other generation before us in writing and talking. We, in a sense, have become the least curious generation than has ever existed in history before. So it maybe it's time that I'm bringing this back, that I'm curious offers a new and novel approach to conversation that people haven't placed a judgment on already. And that may be it, because curiosity is how we learn. So I'm saying I'm interested in learning more from your perspective by saying I'm curious. And you wouldn't think it's such a big pivot, but it is. It's just enough of a pivot that the recipient is like, oh, they're curious. Interesting. I get to teach them something. And it opens up a completely different spectrum of conversation. And until I kind of knew those fun facts, I was struggling with why is it so different? It is. I knew it was, but why? And maybe that's why.
Yeah, one of the things I wrote down as you were talking was that being curious eliminates judgment. And I think that's an important distinction, that if you ask it in a totally open way, I'm curious, it really is without judgment.
And I think that may be the trigger that allows people to relax and not feel as if they're being judged. Because again, when I learned that when we categorize people, when we label people, we've placed a small judgment on them. And when you place a judgment, it shuts down learning more about them. And then that denies you getting to know the other 50% of their humanity because of what the meaning you've placed on that label or category. So yeah, if you can get away from being perceived as judging, you've got a much better chance of getting people to connect with you. And that connection is priceless, just priceless.
Hmm. I, I'm also thinking that wouldn't it be great in an organization to just sort of have some cue cards about, I'm curious, can you tell me more about
Right.
some conversation starters, just to get people um, talking with a new vocabulary, if you will.
And you're right. Who are we, what are your thoughts on this? Where do you see us starting? Or my favorite is, what's the very next thing we need to deal with? What's the number one thing that you think we need to deal with? What's the number one thing that you really want to make sure happens? Where do you think we should start? Who do you think needs to be involved in this decision? Those are some questions that has really revealed quite a bit of unknown information when used. And you're right, I could easily put together, here's a list of sample questions to kind of trigger a conversation, because we do get stuck in our old habits. So if we're asking you to enter into conversations differently, you kind of have to have like that little starting point.
Yeah, some cue cards.
Yeah. And just thinking, I'm curious, or what am I curious about, does cause you to pause just long enough. Really, what am I curious about? Why, you don't want to, I'm curious why they're such a jerk. You can't say that, right? But, somebody's really happy at work and you go, I just want to know why they're so happy. You can go to, I'm curious. You walk in happy every day. What gets you this way, right? So it's, but that terminology, I'm curious, that introduction of the novel is a psychological twist that has been so amazing and so helpful for me as a businesswoman connecting with clients and team members, that it felt like it was worth sharing in this book to help others kind of have some go-to tools if they didn't know where to start, because a lot of times we don't.
So tell me what else you do in your work, Carol. Do you do consulting, speaking, training? Tell us more about what it is that you do.
Wow. So I do consult. I was an HR consultant for a while, until I realized that they kept wanting to shove me back in the office and take care of the paperwork. So I kind of transitioned over to training and coaching. And so I'm a consultant who will come in and look at what problems you think you have and then help you diagnosis. And if I can help with a training or coaching, then I'm there. And if not, I'll reach out into my network and say, I've got a client you need to meet. I do speak on two topics, which is interviewing up, how to communicate in your interview and how to prepare for that, and how to ask and receive feedback. They're both linked to how to convey your value. And so when I coach one-on-one, sometimes people need a change, or they know they want out of a position, they want to interview out or interview up, and they don't know which direction that goes, and there's one-on-one coaching. When people are trying to gain confidence, when they're wanting to understand how to be better at work, and they need to really go after the feedback that they need to understand the direction, coaching and talking and giving them specific tools. There's 3 to 5 things you can actually say in a conversation that controls that feedback. So my whole motivation is to help people understand how to own and communicate their value so that they feel more confidently in control of where their career goes. And where I do that is helping people understand how to communicate the interview and how to go after the feedback they want. So to answer your question much more succinctly, I consult, train, and coach on interviewing and asking for feedback so that they really can own their value. Long answer. Sorry about that.
No, it's great. That's great. And again, we're welcome to take questions from the floor, but seeing none, I just have my own set of curious questions that I want to ask. So let me ask you this, Carol. Have you seen curiosity run amok? In other words, have you seen some unintended negative consequences from being curious?
Yes, when curiosity has an agenda, it's not curiosity anymore.
Aha.
When someone says, I'm going to go find out, and they fake the curiosity, that's not curiosity. That's going in with an agenda and a critical look at the judgment already made. So when people say, well, I've used critical, and I said, no, you haven't used curiosity. Truly, you've gone in with an agenda. And that's when it goes amok. When someone says, I'm going to get to the bottom of this, they're not curious. They're just trying to get to the bottom of something. And so it can be misconstrued if misunderstood. But normally, when someone is using curiosity genuinely, it bypasses the judgment. It opens up the floor for good conversations. But if they say, I'm curious, why'd you do that? That's not curiosity. They're just using a phrase incorrectly. And you have to look at them like, really? Can you phrase that question a little bit different? Like, what are you really curious about? We know they did it, but what are you really curious about? How'd they come at that? And if I'm there, I kind of, well, wait, stop. I'll stop it. Like, okay, that's not really a curiosity question. If you are curious, what are you really curious about? What motivated them to do that? Okay, that's a good question. What gave them cause to do that? Good question. But why they did it? I think you've already passed the judgment. So let's back that up. So like you've indicated, gone amok, it's no different than using the term poorly. So yeah.
Right. So it's really using curiosity with judgment already imposed, and that leads to disaster and more drama. And
it goes the opposite way. They're just faking it, right?
Right.
I care. Like it's when you say, I care, but you don't. And here's an interesting thing. When you're curious about something, you don't have to care. I'm not asking you to care about the people. You will learn to care about your people the more you know about them. You will learn how to be interested in them. But when you start out, I'm not asking you to care or be interested. I'm asking you to be curious. Judgment-free curiosity. And I think it's very freeing when I tell people, I'm not asking you to care about them. I'm not. You can pick the most hated person in the office, and you can still be curious about them without judgment. And that kind of puts it in a new light. That's where compassion really, really works.
Mm-hmm. That's really cool. That's really cool. So tell us more about your book and how to get it and how to get in touch with you, Carol.
So I did include the last page so that they knew where to find the book on my website. There's a little button to pay for it. I was really honored to be part of this group of authors. I've read this book, and there's so many diverse chapters that you will finish this book
Yeah.
with at least 3 things you could do immediately. Whether it's starting a conversation, whether it's understanding how to diffuse anger, or if you're in the middle of helping understand which benefits to put in place for your company, there are so many different diverse perspectives from the bird's eye view to the person who walks the walk that this book is almost for everyone who works in an office. So I really was honored to be a part of this. And so I do have a website, relevantinsight.com. There is a hyphen between relevant and insight because somebody else used relevant insight somewhere out there in the universe. And I do know what they do. They're a data collection company. So they collect the data. I know what to do with it. So that was a really nice kind of segue. Because you're using our name. It's like, I know, but I'm helping you. So it's all good. And then the Compassionate Work does have a landing page. So you can actually kind of go there and purchase this book and it gets shipped directly to you. And on that website is ways to contact me as well. And I'm happy to respond. I do work intimately with that website. So I get every email, I get every request, and I am happy to talk with anyone for any need that they have. It's always fun. I always offer exploratory conversations, whether 15 minutes or an hour, depending on what you want to explore. And maybe we can work together. If nothing else, I can connect you with the right person in my network.
That's awesome. That's awesome, Carol. Thank you so much. Oh, let's also remind people that if you are looking for SHRM recertification credit, this course has been pre-approved, and you have included the activity code that you'll want to record there. So it's SHRM number 18-TMHRS, and this is good for 1 hour of credit. So any final thoughts or concluding remarks, Carol, as we wrap up for today?
No, it was really kind of a fun adventure to do this and be able to explain the take on my chapter. I literally I gave maybe 1 or 2 stories away, so there's quite a few stories in there of how I've used to work through all of the 7 things I found that are beneficial. And I'm just honored to get to talk with people on this topic on a regular basis.
Very good. And we have one question. The question is, what is the activity code again? I think for someone who's calling in.
Right.
And it's number 18-T as in Tom, M as in Mary, HR as in HR, and S as in Sam. Mm-hmm. Very good. Carol, thank you so much. Appreciate your insights. Love this conversation about curiosity.
I love it too, and thanks for letting me do it.
Okay. Thanks, everybody. Bye now.